Good afternoon to all, and I, on behalf of Tibet Museum of Central Tibetan Administration, and I would like to welcome all of you to our talk series event. And before really starting our the event, so I just want to give a brief introduction about why we are hosting this talk series, every twice a month. And its aims and objectives. So since we the Tibet Museum of Central Tibetan Administration falls under the Department of Information and International Relation, and more particularly we falls under the information section, where the information section is main aims and objective is to disseminate or to spread the information about the Tibet issues and Tibet past, present and future. So that with having that the consideration, and we are hosting this talk series. Today indeed I'm very glad and honored to have with us the guest speaker, Mr. Rinchen Dharlo. And if I give a brief intro about the guest speaker, and Mr. Rinchen Dharlo was born in Nyanang, southwestern Tibet, and he escaped with his family in the year 1959, and in the year 1972 Mr. Rinchen Dharlo started working in the, back then we call Tibetan government in exile, but these days we call it like Central Tibetan Administration. And from year 1972 to 74 Mr. Rinchen Dharlo has acting as the bilingual secretary to Tibet, representative of His Holiness, Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama based in Kathmandu, Nepal. And in the year 1974 to 78, Kongla has been acting as a supervisor education section, and where Mr. Rinchen Dharlo also helped establishing a number of Tibetan schools in Nepal. And then in year 1986, Kongla was transferred to New York, and where Kongla has taken the responsibility as the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama office in Americas. And in addition to the regular duties, in year 1990s, Kongla co-chaired the Tibetan United States Resettlement Project, New York. From year 1997 to 2018, Kongla has been acting as the president of Tibet Fund, New York. And then in the year 2018, Kongla was formally retired, and currently Kongla lives in New York with his family. So this is a brief introduction about the guest speaker, and without much taking time, I would like to kindly request our guest speaker, Mr. Rinchen Dharlo, to kindly commence today's talk series event. Thank you so much.
Srinivula, thank you so much for your generous introduction. I would also like to thank all of you for taking your time to come to listen to my talk. Because of short notice, I could not prepare myself. I was informed 5 days ago to talk this afternoon, and unfortunately I did not bring my laptop, so I had to Google photos with my mobile. So I'm going to begin with the slideshow. The photos are not that great, but might help for you to some extent. So let me begin with the slides. I lost now. I need my glass. Oh, I found it. Okay, do you see it clearly? This is the, I better see from here. This is the map of Tibetan Empire. Tibet was, as you know, a very powerful country during 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. at the peak of Yalung dynasty. This is the image of King Songtsen Gampo, the 33rd king of Yalung dynasty. King Songtsen Gampo was a very popular king, and he united the whole of Tibet and also extended his empire west to the border of mainland China. Well, not west, east. And then west, his empire reached as far as Persia. Let me see my note. This is the image of King Songtsen Gampo with his two queens. The right one is Princess Rinchen from Tang Dynasty, Chinese emperor, and the left one is Princess Brikuti Devi of Nepal. This is image of Princess Brikuti. As you see very clearly that she is wearing Nepali sari and yes, our Nepali ornament. This is photo of a statue which is installed in the Chekya Dupuk of Potala Palace. There is a statue of King Songtsen Gampo, Chinese princess as well as Nepali princess. Princess Brikuti played a very important role in terms of promoting Buddhism in Tibet. Not only Buddhism, but also she invited many architects and craftsmen from Nepal. This is a painting of Potala, the Red Fort, the original Potala Palace, which was built during King Songtsen Gampo's time. And Princess Brikuti played a big role in terms of inviting Nepali craftsmen. And she is known as Pesa Tisun in Tibetan language. Ti means throne and Sumo, Sun means queen. So she was the actual, what do we say, throne holder of the queens? The principal queen. King Songtsen Gampo had 5 queens, but she was the most important queens. And later, when King married with Princess Wencheng from Chinese Empire, it is said that for a long time, Princess Wencheng was not able to spend time with King Songtsen Gampo because of jealousy between the two queens. And whenever they quarreled, Princess Brikuti would speak in Nepali and Princess Wencheng would speak in Chinese, and no one would understand. So they are saying that Gyasa Pesa Trubashona Hasa Khosamari, Hala Khosamari. When Princess Wencheng and Princess Brikuti quarrel, no one can understand. That was the saying. So, as I said, that Princess Brikuti invited many architects and craftsmen from Nepal, and they, together with the Tibetan architects and craftsmen, built the Red Fort at the hill, Red Hill. And this is where the left side is the Queen's Palace and right side is the King's Palace. And they built a bridge from the 9th floor to the 10th floor on the other side of the King's. So this was built in 7th century. Just to imagine how, how sophisticated the craftsmen and the architects were in 7th century. Perhaps, this kind of building did not exist in the whole world at that time. This could be the first, multi-store, with bridge in between. And these two paintings one can see today at Potala Palace. At the entrance, on the right side of the entrance, there are some wall paintings, and these two are photographed by a Chinese photographer, and it's one can see it in a magazine, table magazine that the Chinese government has published. This is Chokhang Temple in Lhasa. Again, Chokhang Temple was built by Princess Brikuti of Nepal. And for building this temple, she sought the help of Princess Wencheng from China, because she was said to be an expert in astrology. So she did calculate and then advised her. This was built on a pond, on a small lake, and it's known as Rasa Tulnang. And for whatever reason it is, she was advised to carry mats on the back of a god, and then pour on the small lake and filled it. And then later the temple was built, and everything outside as well as inside resemble some of the temples, important temples in Nepal. The roofs are the same, and also the interior decoration, everything has been, what should I say, copied from the temples in Nepal. When King Songtsen Gampo sought the hands of Prince Brikoti for marriage, Nepal was ruled by King Shivadeva of Licchavi dynasty. Licchavi. Licchavis were from Vishali in India. Vishali was a powerful kingdom in northern India, and it was a democratic country. The country, Vishali did not have a king. It was ruled by a council of voted members who were voted from time to time. And then later on, King Ajatashatru of Magadha invaded Vishali, and Vishali's rulers, they escaped to the north and then came down to Kathmandu Valley and defeated Kirati kings, and they became the ruler of Nepal. This is how the Licchavi dynasty was the most popular, and the period was known as the golden era of Nepal. So King Shivadeva was ruling the country, and King Shivadeva had one daughter and two sons. King Shivadeva was a very devoted Buddhist. So when he became older, he constructed a monastery in Patan city, which is still there, and himself became a monk and retired into spend his time in that monastery, and led his son-in-law to rule the country on his behalf. and king himself was the tutelar head, whereas his son-in-law became the ruler, a de facto king. So this is image of King Amshu Varma of Nepal. This statue stands in front of Pashupati temple. And King Amshu Varma was a very popular and very able person, wise, and also, he developed the country, and also economically, kingdom was very much improved. So he was a very popular and also powerful, and he built his own palace, which was called Kailashkut Bhavan, and he ruled from there. And then also he came up with a new coin, which had his image on one side. On the another side, it says, Amshu something. I forgot the language. Anyway, but he was so loyal to King Shivadeva that he is said to have told his sons not to expect to succeed him. He said that ultimately, when King Shivadeva dies, he will be succeeded by his sons, not Amshu Varma's sons. But then many scholars have described Amshu Varma as the father of Princess Brikuti, which is not. Amshu Varma Siadi Aj Pese and Pala Restio, the Mares Gori. Actually, what happened is that Princess Brikuti was daughter of the older son of King Shivadeva, and who was also crown prince, and his name was Uday Deva. Uday in Hindi means charka, light, and the Deva is La. Deva La, Vesela. Vesela was the father of Princess Brikuti, whereas Amshu Varma, Amshu in Sanskrit meant light, and then also Varma meant armor, Vese Khoja. So names are quite similar. And when Princess Brikuti was sent to Tibet, it was him who did everything. So everyone thought, he was the ruling de facto ruler, and everyone thought that Princess Brikuti was his daughter, which is not. And when King Songtsen Gampo saw the hands of Princess Brikuti, her father and royal family did not want to send her to Tibet, because Tibet was considered to be relatively backward and harsh weather, right, very cold, and far from Nepal. So they did not want to send, but then they feared, invasion from King Songtsen Gampo. And there was the council of ministers and the king. They were in a meeting, and then Princess herself came and volunteered, for the sake of my parents and brothers, and for the sake of the country, I'm willing to become the queen of Songtsen Gampo. And then she volunteered, and she was sent to Tibet. This is image of King Narendra Deva of 7th century. He was younger brother of Princess Brikuti. So what happened is that when King Shivadeva, who became a monk, when he died, King Amshu Varma enthroned his father, Uday Deva, to succeed King Shivadeva. He became the ruler. And then for 2 years he ruled the country, and then also he was also born in Nepal. And after 2 years, his younger brother, whose name was Dhruvadeva. He, in association with Jishnu Gupta, who came from India, he also happened to be a small ruler in India, and they together, dethroned King Udayadeva, and King Udayadeva escaped to Tibet, and he took asylum in Tibet, mainly because his daughter is in Tibet, right? So he went to Tibet and King Narendra was just 2 years old, took him to Tibet, and then no one knows what happened with the king. There's no story, but then he was brought up by King Sonsen Gampo and Queen Brikuti, and after 20 years, Sonsen Gampo sent a huge army, and he came to Nepal and attacked his uncle, dethroned him, and killed Jishnu Gupta, who was actually ruling the country, Jishnu Gupta from India. And King Narendra became very popular, and it is said that he always wore a long dress. It said long dress. I guess he was wearing chuba still, because he lived in Tibet for 20 years and trained by Sonsen Gampo and spoke the language very well. And he is said to be wearing, a Buddha's image kind of pendant. And he built many monasteries, temples in Kathmandu Valley. This is the map of Kanauj. Kanauj was capital of 7th century. It became the capital of Harsha Empire. King Harshavardhana was ruling the country, and the entire northern India was ruled by him, and he was said to be the last Buddhist king. He was, some compare him to Ashoka, yes, he supported many Buddhist temples, and he also helped towards the construction of Nalanda University as well. Okay, it said so. So what happened is that at that time, Chinese emperor always wanted to have a good relation with King Harshavardhana. He already had good relation with King Sonsen Gampo because he sent his daughter to Tibet. And then in order to establish relation, Chinese emperor sent 30 cavalries headed by Wan Shunzi. He was I think one of the generals, with lots of gifts to Harshavardhana. And the guy, he went to India through Tibet, through Kirong, and came down to Tirusuli Valley and came down to Kanauj. And when he reached India, King Harshavardhana already passed away. Unfortunately, his minister Arjuna, he killed 2 of his sons, and he was ruling the country. And when the Chinese emperor's envoy came to Kanauj, he did not want to give the emperor's gift to the minister. When he did not give the gifts to Arjuna, he attacked and confiscated all the gifts, and many of his soldiers died. Fortunately, the Chinese general, he escaped into Nepal, and then took asylum to King Narendra Deva, who immediately informed King Songtsen Gampo, and King Songtsen Gampo sent 7,000 cavaliers, fully armed, and King Narendra Deva from Nepal added another 5,000 soldiers with horses, and then 12,000 soldiers marched to Kanauj, and they fought 3 days of war and defeated Arjuna, and he was they took him as a prisoner of war and sent to Tibet. And from Tibet, King Songtsen Gampo sent him to China. And it is said that, in our history, we said the Tibetan army reached to the south to River Ganges. So that was the time when Tibetan army arrived River Ganges. And then afterwards, many of the warriors, they decided to stay in Nepal. And they were cavaliers, tamak. And that's how Nepal has tamang today. Many, they say tamang is quite a big population in Nepal. And they are said to be descendant of Songtsen Gampo's army. Tamak became tamang, right? Anyway. Okay, this is the image of, story that I told is already there. This is an image of King Harshavardhana. Okay, this is an image of King Trisong Desen, 38th king of Yalung dynasty. And his father married with a princess from China. And that's why, today we call the Chinese Ashang. Chinese became Ashang. Chinese emperor was Ashang of King Trisong Desen. And I don't have to tell you the story that King Songtsen Gampo, played a big role in inviting Guru Sama Padmasambhava and Pandit Shadi Rakshad, right? Shivaso. Again, as I told you earlier, the Tibetan Empire was a power of Central Asia in 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries. Again, this is an image of King Tigalpa who also further expanded the Tibetan Empire, and his army reached as far as Xi'an, in the capital of Chinese emperor, and fought many wars, and finally ended up with a treaty which was curved on 3 pillars. One stood in front of Chokang Temple, another at the border between China and Tibet, and third one in front of the Chinese palace, in which it is said that from now onwards there won't be any war. Chinese will be happy in the lowland of China, and Tibetans will be happy in the highlands of Tibet. Okay, this is actually a map showing where the Tibetan army have reached in Persia. You see Talas, Kashmir above that Talas, and then all Tufan, Karakash. Actually, that time, entire Xinjiang, Chinese called Xinjiang or Uyghur, at that time there were 4 kingdoms, all fell under Tibetan army. And also a part of Afghanistan, like Kabul was ruled by Tibet, and also Tibetan army encircled Transylvania, which is Samarkand of today in Uzbekistan. And this map shows their arrows pointing, Fargana, there is Talas, and Battle of Talas is very much known. That time, for centuries, Chinese emperors occupied the Silk Road, controlled the Silk Road, and there was competition between Tibetan Empire and Chinese Empire for controlling Silk Road. And this time, Tibetans united with the Arabs, Arab caliphates, and then Tibetan army also brought Turks from Xinjiang, Uyghur, and so 3 units of army, like Tibetan army, the Arabs, and then also Turks from Xinjiang, they fought against the Chinese soldiers, and Chinese were very badly defeated and then had to return. So until that time, Uzbekistan, Kashmir, Fargana, I was telling you, Kabul, and all those were people in all those areas were Buddhists. But then, soon after Chinese left, Tibet had problem. Like King Langdharma was, assassinated, and mighty Tibetan Empire disintegrated into small princedoms, and Tibetans lost their control in that area, and slowly the Muslims came, and all those Buddhists got converted into Islam. And in Kabul, the Tibetan governor in Kabul was asked to surrender, and when he surrendered, he was asked to become Muslim, and when he refused, they said they were going to cut his head. So he not only surrendered but also became a Muslim. Okay, this I already told you, the stone pillar with treaty inscribed of a Nepali craftsman, an architect who was born in the Patan city in Nepal, and his name was Arniko. During the time of Sakya Phagpa, Chögya Phagpa, he was planning to build Sakya Lagang Chemo, Sakya big temple, and wrote to Malla king in Nepal requesting to send 100 architects and craftsmen. So Malla king himself interviewed 100 people, and then he has selected 100 people and appointed the youngest one, Arniko, as their head. And Arniko, when he came to Sakya, he helped for the construction of Sakya Lagang Chemu, and then also built most of the big statues in that temple. And at that time, he had profound faith with Sakya Chögya Phagpa, and he also became a monk. And then he became so popular. He was so expert in his area of expertise. And then Chögya Phagpa encouraged him to go to China and meet Emperor Kublai Khan. He was sent to China, and when he reached China, Kublai Khan first asked him to repair a statue of Sung, one of the kings, Sung King, and he repaired it so nicely that he was so happy. And later, he is also said to be a very good painter, and he painted Kublai Khan and his queen, and that was so good. That king was so happy that he was named as the head of the entire gazetted artists in mainland China. And he became so famous that he had a lot of wealth, and with wealth he became greedy, and then he also gave up his robe and married with 4 Mongolian wives, and there's nothing after that. This statue was built in 2015 by a delegation from Nepal. They installed it in front of White Pagoda in Beijing, which was built by him. And he also built a huge pagoda stupa in Wudhaishan, Ganarivuzenga. That's also there. So many, Nepalis, they, consider him to be very important and always, try to promote. And highway from Kathmandu Valley to Tibet, which was built in 70s, that's named after him. It's called Arniko Highway, 127 kilometers of road from Kathmandu to Nepal-Tibet border. That's named Arniko. This Sakya Hangachamu, which was built mainly with the help of Arniko and Nepali craftsmen. This is Gangchen Kyishong, famous Gangchen Kyishong, which was also built mainly by Nepali architects and craftsmen. Potala Palace, as we know, when Potala Palace was built, Desi Sangya Gyaso, Regent Sangya Gyaso invited 191 Nepali architects and craftsmen, and he also had thousands of craftsmen from China, and he also invited a few from Mongolia, and then of course so many from Tibet itself. So Potala was constructed with the help of international architects. Unfortunately, Tibet fought its first war with Nepal in 792. As I told you earlier, that Tibet always had cordial relation with Nepal, starting from Songtsen Gampo. Like when Princess Brikuti came to Tibet, it was very difficult for her to, food habit. Tibetans eat samba, and she is not used in eating samba. She always ate rice, and also she needed spice in her food, which Tibetans did not have at that time. So every year or by year, she used to send a delegation to bring whatever she needed, like clothes. She always wanted to wear saris and cotton clothes, and also she wanted to eat rice and spice and dal, right, which Tibet did not have. So from Songtsen's time, the officials who were sent to Nepal were called Tenshingpa, and also built statues and brought religious objects like silver cups, butter lamps, mandalas, and pumbas, and so on. And so this tradition continued until 1956, I believe, 56. Tenshingpas came year by year to Nepal, and the Nepali government always welcomed them and gave accommodation, and also Nepalis provided horse while they were in Kathmandu Valley, and hundreds of Nepali women were engaged by the government to weaving all the curtains and goyol khasure, door door hangings, right? Door hangings, and of Potala Palace, as well as Chokan Temple, came from Nepal. Materials for those came from Nepal. And of course, rice, dal, spice, and all the ritual objects came from Nepal. And it is said that every year, like in 50s, there used to be around 1,000 porters were engaged in carrying supplies for Tibet, and Nepali government always sent army carrying supplies for Tibet up to the border. If it is 100, they would send 600 to Kirong via Kirong, and would escort up to the border, and 400 to Nyalam and up to the Nyalam border, and then from there onwards, it's the Tibetan government who used to transport. After 1951, when China succeeded in invading Tibet and concluded by signing the 17-point agreement. After that, when Tenzin was arrived in Nepal, Nepali government said, gave money and said, now we cannot send our army to escort the supply carriers to the border. So please hire by yourself, that kind of thing. So Nepali government also changed. Okay, then I have shown you two leather cannons. Tibet did not have paper currency and coins in ancient time. So Tibetans always asked Nepali government to mint silver coins for the use in Tibet. And Malla kings always used to send silver coins to Tibet, which was in circulation in the entire Tibet. It's called kotam. Kotam means the Nepali coin. And later in 17th century, 792, just around 1780s, the Shah kings invaded Kathmandu Valley and defeated Malla kings. And Shah became the king. Shahs are from Rajasthan, Rajputs. They also, when Akbar and Alexander and Shah Jahan, when they defeated Rajput kings, they escaped into Nepal and they lived in a small place called Gorkha. They lived in Gorkha, and then there they established their own kingdoms, very small kingdom called Gorkha kings. And then finally, Rajputs are expert in military, right? So they were very powerful, and then they grew, and then finally invaded and occupied the whole of Nepal and unified Nepal as one kingdom. And then, in that time, 1780s or early 90s, Tibetan government found that coins were not pure silver, and complained the Gorkha government for mixing other metals in the silver coin, and then stopped circulating silver coins in Tibet. And then because of that, there was a dispute, and Gorkha, they invaded Tibet and fought a fierce war, and then that time confiscated many weapons, including these two leather cannons, which is displayed at National Museum in Kathmandu. It is still there. But then afterwards, relations was restored, and also the trade resumed, and Gorkhas, the king, some call Gorkha, but Shah Shah dynasty of Gorkha. They, during the first war, Nyalam, Kirong, and Rongshar, these three border towns were fully occupied by the Nepali. Like my native town, Nyalam, which became a part of Nepal for almost 75 years and remained under Nepal's control. And that's why, a large number of Nepalis, Newars, lived in my native town. So anyway, later, during the second war between Tibet and Nepal, a treaty was, signed, and the three border towns occupied by Nepal was returned to Tibet, and in return, Tibetans were, made to pay 20,000 Nepali rupees per year. Kodam, that was silver coins, 20,000 silver coins per year. So relation became normal, and then there was exchange of gifts between the Tibetan government and Gorkhas, and this is an elephant that was sent as a gift to the 14th Dalai Lama when he was enthroned by King Tribhuvan Bir Bikram Shah, and it is said that this elephant lived until 1966, well after the occupation. Okay, this is one of the Nepali ambassadors, Colonel Hirya Bahadur Bista, and he together with the Nepali embassy staff. I got these photos from his son, who feels very proud that his father was ambassador to Tibet, and he himself was in Tibet when he was around 10 years old, and he has a lot of photos. And as I said, many Nepalis lived, Nepali businessmen, Nepal's craftsmen, and then they established Chamber of Commerce in Lhasa, and this photo was taken in 1943. The guy in the center, he's said to be their lawyer. And all are wearing Tibetan clothes. And this is more recent, and I know some of them, like the entire, on the right-hand side. He grew up in my native town and went to Lhasa and made his fortune. And again, a group of Nepali members of Chamber of Commerce. The photo was taken in 1948. Okay, now coming back to the Tibetan refugees. This is photo of Father Morin. He lived in Nepal for many years. When Nepal had its first college, Trichandra College, he was living in Patna, running Jesuit school in Patna, and he was invited to oversee the English examination of Trichandra College. And then since then he went to Nepal from time to time and established two schools, St. Mary's and St. Joseph School. So when Tibetans, in 1959, 60, 61, and 2, almost 40,000 Tibetans have crossed the border to Nepal. Nepal has a very long border with Tibet, starting with Tingke and Walung, Tingke in Tibet and Walung in Tibet in Nepal, and then Tingri and Shekhar in Tibet, and then Shakumbu, Solukhumbu in Nepal, and then Rongshar in Tibet, and Lamubagir in Nepal bordering, and Nyalam in Tibet, and Tatopani and Kodari in Nepal, and then Kirong in Tibet, and Rasua. Oh, Chusutosoi. Okay, anyway, I will not go into detail. Anyway, so then so many have died, those who have reached Kathmandu Valley due to climatical difference and also malnutrition and lack of medical facilities. So Father Moring established what you call, it's written there, Nepal International Tibetan Relief Committee, and he was assisted by Peter Opschnatter, who was in Tibet with Henry Harrer. And Peter Opschnatter, he preferred to stay in Kirong for longer, and then later came to Nepal. And then, since he spoke Tibetan language, he was very, helpful in establishing this committee. And then there was a Russian, Boris, I forgot his last name, and Boris was running the only international standard hotel in Nepal. It was called Royal Hotel, which has become today, is very close to the palace, and today is the election commissioner's office. And he was running there, and Boris hosted a reception. He, since he was running the hotel, he provided coffee and cakes, and they had the first meeting of the Nepal-Tibetan Refugee International Relief Committee. And then soon after, all the first ladies of the embassies in Kathmandu, they had a party, Easter party, and raised fund, and which was shared by first ladies of the embassies, and raised substantial amount. And then since they started this, they approached all the Red Cross, like Swiss Red Cross Society, Nepal Red Cross Society, Swiss Association for Technical Assistance, and so on. And they received help from Indian Red Cross as well. And then later, it was handed over to International Red Cross Society, who decided to oversee the relief for Tibetan refugees. And this is Tony Hagen, a Swiss geologist who was a strong member of Nepal Tibetan Relief Committee, and he became the first director of International Red Cross Society for looking after the Tibetans refugees. And in 1961, he came to Dharamshala to meet His Holiness, and His Holiness sent his first representative to Nepal, Mr. Lobsang Gelek. He was sent to Nepal, and they teamed, and that, sorry. So that time, Tony Hagen reported to His Holiness that we have a lot of difficulties in reaching relief to Tibetan refugees in Mustang and Solukhumbu and all those remote areas. But then he said, International Red Cross Society has donated 2 planes, 2 plus water planes. And he said that very soon we will be getting planes. And then that time, they were constructing airstrips, airports. Pablu Airport in Solukhumbu, that was built to provide relief for Tibetan refugees. And then also in Jomsom, there is an airport that was also built to send supplies to Tibetans. And in Dolbadan also there is a small airport that was also built. Actually, it's plain, nothing built except they removed stones and the trees. That's it. Anyway, so he reported to His Holiness that very soon we will be getting 2 planes, and then airports are being built, and within a month airports will be ready, and then we will have no problem in sending supplies to Tibetan refugees. So 2 airplanes came, and they were Swiss pilots, and I remember one was Captain Emily, forgot the last name. He was there even in 70s when I first went back to Nepal to work. And anyway, so that cuts a little bit. So then Tony Hagen and Father Morang established the first Tibetan carpet factory in Jwalakil. You know, when Tibetans came, they came with skills of spinning, carding, and weaving. And they interviewed and found there were 8 weavers. One of them was a family called Pa Migma. Pa Migma was from Shigaze, and he had his own carpet factory cottage in Shigaze. His wife and his sister, they were very good carpet weavers. And there was a woman from Gangze, Amapendok, and then 2 sisters from Lhasa. They were also carpet weavers. So altogether there were 8 carpet weavers, and each of them trained young girls. And Jolkal Handicraft Center was started with 8 looms with 16 weavers. That was the first carpet factory in exile. And then for the establishment of carpet factory, His Holiness gave some money, and then also a Swiss Association for Technical Assistance, Swiss government also provided funding, and His Holiness and Swiss government became the shareholder because carpet factory was established as profit. It was not a non-profit. So what happened is that on those days we had Swiss managers. Like after Jawalkal, one factory was established in Solukhumbu, Chalsa, another in Yangja in Pokhara, and 4th one in Dorpatan. There were 4 handicraft centers established with the help of Swiss government, and in all those factories we had Swiss managers, Swiss production managers, Swiss accountants, and so all those Swiss staff, they were of course paid by the Swiss government, but then they also received salary from each of these handicraft centers. So what happened is that in 72 all the projects were handed over to Tibetans. In the meantime, Swiss trained many Tibetans from the 4 settlements, and also brought young men and women from India and trained them how to run the factory. Some were trained as accountants. And then when Swiss government handed over handicraft centers back to the Tibetans, there were a pool of fund. Like Swiss staff, when they received salaries from these factories, it was all deposited into an account. And then with that amount, the Swiss government, SADA, started Snowline Foundation to help the schools and the elderly people, and also help dispensaries, schools and dispensaries. So over the years, then Snowline Foundation grew, and today Snowline Foundation looks after, when I was there were 14 schools, but now some schools are closed. So how many schools do we have above? 10, 11? 9? Oh, today 9 schools. But in our schools today, majority of local people. Like if a school has 100 children, maybe 60 are Sherpas, Tamangs, Lobas, and the people from Helmpu and so on, and the rest are Tibetans. And then also, like carpet factories, carpet factory has become major, employment for the Nepali people. At its peak in 80s and 90s, roughly 2 million Nepalis were employed by the Tibetan refugees. And carpet factories were started by many of those who have never been to a school. Like those who were employed in our factories, many of them, were, those who worked as carpet, weaving master or dyeing master or whatever. In the meantime, they left the factories and then started their own cottage industry. And similarly, more and more Tibetans have left the carpet factories and started their own small, cottage factory. And in 90s, there were roughly 5,000 factories mainly run by Tibetan refugees. And in late 80s, when young Tibetans graduated high schools and colleges from India, they went back to Nepal, and some have started become employees of people who have never been to a school. Anyway, so carpet really exports boomed. It also happened at a time when Afghanistan was occupied by Russia, and people who imported Persian rug, they had difficulties in importing carpets from Persia, and then they came to know about Tibetan carpets in Nepal, and then that's how every carpet dealers in Europe bought carpets from Nepal, and it really has gone up. Now, let me finish. There are many, like for centuries, for generation to generation, Nepali craftsmen, including silversmith and statue molders, they have been supplying their products to Tibet, to the monasteries in entire Tibet, to the homes of Tibetan families, and then also to Sikkim and Bhutan as well. But in 1959, after Chinese invasion, when the Tibetans became refugees, border was sealed, so their product could not go to Tibet, and Tibetans could also not buy, Nepali products. And Tibetan refugees, being refugee, they were selling their own, whatever they brought, silver utensils or silver cups, they sold their own, own ritual objects. So the craftsmen in Nepal, they became poor. There was no demand for their product, and many of them have become farmers. But then slowly, starting early 70s, many of those who came in exile, they became, their economy grew, and many of them began to commission, butter lamps and silver cups and mandalas and so on. And then at the same time, Tibetan Lamas traveled abroad and established Dharma centers all over the world. And all these Dharma centers ordered their ritual needs from Nepal. And then their members of the religious centers, they also ordered, and then it boomed. And by 80s, again, there were hundreds of silversmiths. And under each of them, they had, at least 25, doing in their own home. So market boomed, statue molders as well. And today it's much more. Like today, their product goes to not only to Europe and America, but also to Singapore, Malaysia, Hong Kong, and mainland China. So much in mainland China that every day, like cargo, half plane filled cargo go to mainland China. And not only ritual needs, but also decoration like moksas and vas, and what else. All these products go to mainland China. And Tibetans from Tibet, they buy from Chengdu. Chinese in Chengdu, they order from Nepal, and they have their shops in Chengdu, Tibetan market. They buy from there. And what else? Just one. Yeah, so it's going very, very well. And in Bauda area, if you go to Nepal and go to Bauda, there are at least 1,000 shops. And if you visit each shop, all the shops are filled with Tibetan needs, religious objects one could find. The silver cups, pumbas, mandalas, clothes, incense, prayer flags, and everything that's needed for Tibetan monasteries or ritual, one can find in Bauda. And then, as I said, there are 1,000, more than 1,000 shops, and they live with the sale of Tibetan merchandise. And under them, there are suppliers, several thousand, even millions. They live with producing needs for Tibetan monasteries and so on. So that's one thing. And then, as I said, in our schools, we have local people, 60%, and they are doing so well that when we came in exile, many of these Tamans, Gurungs, Sherpas, they were becoming Hindus. Many of them have their names like Ram, Sita, Lakshmi, and so on. And today they are changing their names even. And they are wearing, it has become a fashion to wear Tibetan chubas, the women. And if you see YouTube, if you Google Tamang songs or dances, you see Tamangs wearing Tibetan chuba very proudly, chuba, and then mixing Tibetan language in between the songs. And not only this, those who graduate from our schools, they are doing very, very well. And then monasteries, so many monasteries are established. At least 125 newly built monasteries are in Nepal. It all starts from here. In 1963, His Holiness called a meeting of all the head lamas. And you see there Sajja Tijin Rinpoche, Kamaba, Dundram Rinpoche, and 2 tutors for His Holiness, and Bagula Rinpoche from Ladakh. All the lineage lamas have come to Dharamshala in 1963. And then the meeting, they discussed how to preserve the Tibetan Buddhism and how to promote. And that's result. As a result, you see so many monasteries all over the world now. And each of these monasteries have hundreds of young novices from remote areas. And after graduating from each of these monasteries, they are sent to Sajja College, Mindeling Sheta, Rumdek Sheta, and then also to Sera Drebung Kanden, and also to Varanasi, Central University for Tibetan Higher Studies. And today we have many graduates from these institutions, and at least there are 200 Geshes and Khenpos. Those who graduate from Sajja, Nyingma, and Gaju monastery, they are called Khenpos. Those who graduate from Gelugpa monasteries, they are called Geshes. And they are doing very well. They are promoting and preserving Tibetan culture. And not only this, that today we find, if you Google like Mustangs, they are so proud of their Tibetan culture that many of them are now, practicing, Tibetan dances. And those children who study in Tibetan schools, when they go back to their villages, they try to adapt the local, their own songs and dances on stage, and you find a lot of good performances, like especially Yolmobas, Mustangs, Zumbas, and Sherpas. So I think I've taken a lot of time, but if you have questions and if we have time, I'm happy to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. With this, we have completed today's presentation on our event. And now we have like 10 minutes of question answer session. So if any questions you want to ask to today's guest speaker, kindly please take the opportunity. Thank you so much.
I'm interested in knowing what are the changes that took place in Nepal after the growing footprints, Chinese footprints in Nepal, and the growing closeness between the leadership in Nepal and in China. How are the impacts on the Tibetan business as well? What has been the impact of the recent changes in the leadership and the growing closeness with China?
You mean impact of business with Chinese?
No, the closeness between the Chinese leadership and the Nepalese leadership has been has a huge impact, not only on the Tibetan business in Nepal, but also the growing Chinese footprints that, what I heard from people living in Nepal has been that the landscape in Nepal has been changing since there has been more Chinese business that has been investing in Nepal. How has that impacted the Tibetan business that you have mentioned since then?
I really don't know if the Chinese influence in China in Nepal has affected the Tibetan business. Tibetan carpet business was affected mainly because of the instability in Nepal itself. When there was revolt against the monarchy, like Maoists, they came in such a big force that, and then they were also against the factory owners. They were demanding so much unreasonable demands, like in terms of wages, that and then also there were a lot of other demands, and that's why Tibetans could not continue the carpet factories. And one thing was that when there was big production of carpets in the past, all the carpets used to be washed in Europe. Carpets are exported directly and washed in Europe, and which gives shine. But then lately, Tibetans began to establish washing factories in Nepal, and by washing carpets, a lot of chemical was used, and the water, it sank into the ground, and it polluted the whole of Kathmandu Valley, and that was also one of the reasons. And then also child laborhood has also caused a lot of problem, and that was the main cause of Tibetans losing business. Chinese, of course, Chinese have they're very, very aggressive, and so many shops are being opened, so many restaurants have come up, and the Chinese embassy has always been behind them, economically supporting and also giving legal protection, and so many shops and restaurants have come up, and this may have impacted to some extent, but not that much. But the Chinese, traders in Nepal is expanding, increasing day by day.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Rinchen Dharlo, for your kind of like very informative presentation, and thank you all for making this event more successful with your presence. And we have come to the end of this event now, and I would like to end this event formally by saying this phrase: a good event never ends in the world. They take only a pause and keep us waiting for the next. So kindly stay tuned on our next event, and also you can go through our social media page, the Tibet Museum Facebook, and we just upload our events recorded video on our social media. Thank you so much.